to you. Yeah, they will all come back to you. But nobody there means no one to share your last meal with. Your spirit's in disrepair. You wonder if Siddhartha wished all the Buddha. Was he scared? Hope his people make it back to him. Hope his people make it back to him. Devil's always after him. Yeah, the devil's always after him. Oh, Apollo, can we be spared and wait for impending disaster? Oh, does anything care? Oh, they write in Zoroaster. Oh, are you even there? Or is it life in darkness after? Oh, is it life in darkness after? Oh, are you even there? Or is it life in darkness after? Oh, is it life in darkness after? Oh, about the way the world's crumbling down and down and down. No beach, just coast will come closer to town. Well, I see San Francisco Bay in the sundown through goggles or underground. Suddenly, California can't be found. Should all take a good last look around. It's closing time. I leave home. The neon glow and the open sign. You're coming anytime, but you passed it by the road you're on. Gotta try to turn around your own sign. Oh, but you're running out of time. How long do you think we'll stumble around and drown, saying the structure of the world was faulty found? For what it's worth, the earth is round. nothing at all, at all, at all. How long till the third tallest tower falls? It's closing time. I'll leave on the neon glow at the open sign. You're coming anytime, but you passed it by the road you're on. Gotta try to turn around your own design. Oh, but you're running out of time. There's hope alive inside. You're coming anytime, 'cause there's hope alive inside. You're running out of time, but there's hope alive inside. You're coming anytime, 'cause there's hope alive inside. Oh, but you're running out of time.
Possible by a community that funds these projects, a community of nature enthusiasts like you and I. One person doesn't have a lot of impact on the environment, but bundling resources of a community
Gross. Discord.
can achieve a lot. What I find so great about Planet Wild is that they don't leave me wondering where my money goes. You can become a nature supporter for as little as $6 a month. That doesn't even buy you a sandwich at Heathrow. And don't worry that you'll get stuck with them. You can cancel your membership every month. I support Planet Wild because I can see it has a direct impact on preserving nature and protecting our ecosystems. If you want to join a growing community that makes a real difference, go check out Planet Wild through the link in the description or by scanning the QR code and consider becoming a supporter. I'll cover the first month of your subscription if you're among the first 200 people signing up with the code Sabine. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Union busting social spelling on Twitter. That one guy is not. That guy will never talk to you. No. He used to represent Trump. Okay, hold on. I'm almost done with my stuff. You guys are doing a great job.
I want to get perspective now from an attorney who formerly represented former President Donald Trump, Tim Parlatore. Tim, thanks for being here back on The Source. I mean, this is the second jury to find Trump's blame for defaming E. Jean Carroll. Do you believe he accepts this?
You know, I don't. I mean, obviously, by standing up and walking out in the middle of
Wait. This fuck. This is the guy we want to talk to.
is, and the crazy thing is, they awarded $5 million for the actual found yourself, and then several magnitudes more.
She said outside court that she didn't regret representing Trump. You know both of them. Do you think it's the other way around? That's having her.
Wait, am I crazy, or does it feel like this girl's just like asking like the weirdest questions? Like, do you like? How do you think they feel? I feel like this is when people come on my stream, when they hop into this, they're like, "Hey, how do you feel about this?" Or like,
Representative?
Certainly, from my perspective, I do think that in both of these trials, and I think I don't think there's And so all of these, things that she did throughout the process, I don't think helps at all.
Well, what about him?
And that's also a matter of, in the courtroom, the attorney is the one who should be telling the client, how to act, what to be doing, and everything else. And one thing I always tell my clients is, in the courtroom, there's only 12 opinions that matter, and yours is not one of them. Everything we do has to be guided.
she looks smug. She's probably, not to sound mean, if I had to guess, she probably or somebody probably told her. Even like public policy, it's like racist the way that it goes. Wow, Marathon 2, thanks for upgrading to great.
Not the fact that there was a verdict, but rather, was the verdict excessive? And I think that that's where they're going to try and just knock down the number. And so I think that between that, obviously he's going to have to post some kind of a bond. It's not going to be the full amount. But if they can, put forth, somewhat of a decent appeal on, the amount of the number, and at the same time, if they do have appellate issues on the first case, that can also affect the second case. And, quite frankly, if I were still there, I would be looking for a way to try and figure out, how do we work out a resolution on this, a settlement, to just put this to bed and move on.
Should he reconsider having Alina Habba or his current legal team, should he reconsider having them represent him in that appeal?
Oh, yes. I mean, definitely you shouldn't have the same lawyer that did the case do your appeal. That's generally inadvisable because the attorney who tried the case is going to have a lot of personal biases on how they tried the case. And so you really want to have a fresh set of eyes in on it. You want to have somebody who's actually an appellate expert on it, which I do not believe Alina Habba is an appellate expert.
Tim Parlatore, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim Parlatore. you so much. Talk soon. All right. We're doing it. Oh boy. Oh boy. Video game. Probably the chicken. Oh wait, I can do other stuff. Why do we hear any at all?
District Court of the District of New York said some of the greatest judges in American history. This judge has appeared this grave. He's telling a lawyer what questions to ask. That's totally ridiculous. He won't let him defend himself. And how is it inconsistent? Let's say he was. First of all, he was found not guilty or not liable for rape. It was sexual assault, not rape. And second, you can be guilty of rape, and still a person can be a wacko.
Yeah.
That was a defamation. You're allowed to still defend yourself against defamation. I got that. What is that?
House please. Wait.
That the single biggest terrorist organization.
Is ding 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 ding. Is it going to be United States or Israel?
Think about it. Biggest terror.
I would say United States. Fuck. Okay, you qualified it in the House. Which is Orwellianly named the Israeli Defense Force. Ironic, given they're actually the Israeli Offensive Force. Terrorism.
Which is Orwellianly named, the Defense Forces of Israel has engaged in massive war crimes for decades after decades on civilians, engaging in the mass killing of civilians, land theft, water. I mean, just the list of atrocities goes on and on and on. And if you want to just go by a timeline, the question might be, Why did the American think it can impose decade after decade of
Occupation and not expect an October 7th terrorist attack?
occupation and seize on Palestinians and deny them any prospect for a better future, and not think that there's going to be a reaction of sorts?
True. Remember, only Palestinians can be provoked, okay? Not Israelis, only Palestinians.
So we have this a little bit backwards.
Because history starts on October 6th, guys.
We have this
It went Israeli antagonism and then October 7th. That's it. That's the only history that's existed in the entirety of it.
arbitrary starting point of an attack by Hamas.
Which would be arbitrary. Why would we start on October 7th? Let's just go a few days earlier when we see Israel was harassing the Palestinians. That's not arbitrary.
Had it been confined to military targets, could have been, to ensure there's an actual legitimate resistance. But because it also included attacks, horrendous attacks on civilians, obviously these kinds of attacks are defensible. But ultimately, we are talking about a situation in which Israel is initiating violence, in which Israeli terrorism roars.
Honestly, say one more time. Isn't that true? I'm pretty sure, at least in Europe, isn't Ukraine like one of the most corrupt countries? Corruption index. I mean, maybe there are like more. Maybe there are probably. I guess there are other countries on other continents that are more fucked, but. Or maybe this is actually reverse. Like maybe Denmark is the most corrupt country. World. Okay. It's not the most corrupt country of the world. There are African countries and island nations. Worse. This is December of 2022 as well. Pretty sure it could have been worse. Is there a way I could look at that? Toronto's number one. It's always the people that make these indexes are always white users. So the least corrupt countries are always like, oh my god, Denmark, Norway, and Finland topped it again. Always. Ah, there we go. Denmark, Finland, Norway. Ah, the usual suspects. My heart started pounding in my chest last night. And I had the scariest thought. I don't think it would happen. I mean, it's not impossible. I don't think it would happen though, but like, what if the Daily Wire came and they were like, we want you to be our token liberal. We'll give you like $2 million a year base plus whatever other extra bullshit we have you do. Oh no. And then all the people would be right. about like one thing I was thinking about. I recently I don't know if I got really mad at the rest of the Daily Wire was like 7 or whatever. In retrospect, when I look at a lot of that conversation, I think I understand why people got really mad about it. Because I centered a lot of the Daily Wire on Ben Shapiro. I'm pretty sure Ben Shapiro is the far left representative in that block. I mean, actually look at all the different people. Michael Knowles, Candace Owens. Ben Shapiro is probably the furthest left person. Yeah, but I don't. Where are we at? Bill Maher is, I think, Bill Maher might be. I heard you yesterday in your Facebook war with I'm gonna be honest, I just think people talking this shit. We should look this up. I feel like I've seen it repeated a lot, that urban warfare deaths can be like 8 to 1 to 9 to 1. Or like civilians for is there an actual source on that? Urban warfare, like what's like a good Abby did a post on this. Oh, if you want to link it, link it. Let's watch this record.
But here's, I feel like the last couple of years, you've like perfectly picked this fight with the red states. I mean,
God, I'm gonna be honest. I don't think I knew what Gavin Newsom looked like until like a week ago. We looked at a video of him. He kind of looks like a fucking Giga Chad. Do you think? He looks like what a politician guy would look like on a TV show.
the DeSantis.
Look up Grozny. It's one of the reasons people don't want to ever do urban warfare in Russia to level the place. Careful when we're saying, like, what does urban warfare have to look like in Russia? Russia is, the way that Russia conducts warfare is how people think, is how lefties think the United States conducts warfare. Putin has no qualms about fucking annihilating us if he thinks that it's going to help them effect something. Instruction wars, you saw it when he was coordinating with Assad in Syria, we've seen it in some places in Ukraine. Putin has no qualms about just annihilating us. It's not even
You know what? This is like you purposely want to set up this dichotomy between, oh, this is a blue state, it's a red state, and I like Florida.
I'm with you. And by the way, I like Florida as well. I like all these states. I completely agree. I don't want to have a state of mind that's a constant fight. We've gone through some polarized and traumatized. We've been a tough 5-6 years. That's it. I'm not going to sit.
Destiny, you need to get yourself an honorary idea shirt at this point. Holy fucking Christ. Hey, listen, point this out. I see some people doing it on Twitter finally, okay? Point this out when you see it, okay? A lot of people call me a propagandist, say I'm uneducated, say I don't know what I'm talking about. So they never actually point out anything I'm correct about. Always keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. Never seem to have, like, an actual, like, you are wrong on this. I don't know if it is I don't know if I've had a single large account on Twitter ever fact-check me on anything ever. I think it's always, usually it's actually now, to be fair, a lot of it is shifted to and then before it was Bloomberg. I have this issue with, I was trying to remember this. I have this issue. The F word, it's a really good word. I started saying it a bit more in my personal life, because I think I'm allowed to. But then, the thing is, I don't like it. I don't like it because I don't trust guys. And then I also don't like gay guys that say that. It sounds like a bitch. It also sounds like it's like the novel, it's like the, not novel, it's like the legendary, like unusable in any real circumstance, like the legendary, that when the people can slow road.
Going back over women's rights, not just access to abortion, perception. It's a profound consequential moment. And you could sit by and say, well, we didn't want to get along because you guys are rolling back the clock so we can stand tall. And the reason I started to go into those red states, the reason I started to do this, the reason I started doing ads in these
I watched a bit of Simpsons today. How long is like people's time to run for president? It seems like he carries himself as least okay, young man.
It was CRT one year, and then it's ESG, and it's DEI. Anything with 3 letters, these guys keep coming, and they're shape-shifting, and they're trying. And so, but it's one year, and then it's these red states. To go into those red states, the reason I started to take on DeSantis, and the reason I started doing ads in these red states, is I didn't feel my party was doing enough. It was CRT one year, and then it's ESG, and it's DEI. Anything with 3 letters, these guys keep coming, and they're shape-shifting. And they're trying, and so, but it's true, right? And so I just thought there was a little timidity in our party. And I thought we needed to call this stuff out. These guys are being on a banning binge across this country. You want to talk about cancel culture? Look at the Republican Party. Ask Bud Light, Target, Disney. That's just the private sector.
Oh, that's such a good point, and they need to bring it up more. The idea that like cancel culture only exists on the fucking left, when Republicans are itching to try to cancel anybody they don't like. And they used to do this too, prior, like with all the LGBT stuff when I was growing up and shit, man. Bro, when certain bands, when guys would wear like earrings, it was like fucking Christian moms went fucking insane. Or people talking about music that was the Demons music and need to be canceled, and like fucking this actor is fucking gay and it's blah blah blah. Yeah. And yeah, Jack Thompson and the fucking whole fight against video games are evil and they need to be censored and blah blah blah. Yeah.
Banning speech, not just in the classroom, but in the boardroom as it relates to issues of race. Look what they've done. 3,362 books just last year they're banning. This is a serious and consequential moment. It's the cultural purge that's going on in this country. And so I just felt like we needed to call that out as Democrats and put them on the defensive, since we're consistently on our heels as a Democratic Party, even though I think the facts bear out our case significantly better than
fuck, this was literally my motivation, I think, for getting into politics like 7 or 8 years ago, because I kept wondering, why do Democrats act like such cucks all the time in debates and everything, or like, oh, we can't do this, or oh, well, at least we've got the moral authority. Like, you don't have just the moral authority, you have the factual authority as well. Why don't you act like
it? Even though I think the facts bear out our case significantly better than the case on the other side. But again, Bill, I say all that with love in my heart, with love in my heart. And I mean that, man. I mean, I don't talk down to people. I don't want to talk past people. Everyone wants to be respected, connected, and protected. And we all want to be loved and need to be loved.
Oh, respected, connected, protected. That's cute. He's got slogans and everything.
I'm with you on all that. At the same time, man, when you're going after the LGBT community and talking down to people and humiliating folks, you're threatening to sue the Special Olympians, when you're going after the black community and trying to rewrite history and saying slavery somehow was some workforce development program, damn it, we have to call that stuff. Off my high horse.
Younger people do it better. No, that's not true. I shouldn't say that. Trump. I wonder if Trump is actually cognitively slid. Because he's had some ugly speeches that I've seen recently. Those might be some Twitter highlights. Yeah, Gavin sounds much better. Biden was like this when he was younger. Man, Biden was worse than him. Wyatt. I remember twice. Biden trying to get Congress back to Bosnia or whatever. Yeah, it was fucking wild. Oh, wow. This was like 30 years ago. Bosnia would have been. Bro, if we ever watch some real content, we go slow. Quite possibly the highest concentration of borderline genetically identical people trying to concentrate on someday, maybe.
It does not endorse the agreement reached in Dayton. It does support our men and women in uniform. It does limit the mission to military tasks only and requires a
Thank you, rock and roll cowboy.
strategy based on the goal of Bosnian self-reliance. To put it simply, President Clinton has a plan to get us into Bosnia. This resolution shows us a way out. This is a signal to the American forces that we support you.
Unify that continent. Stand up to this kind of only anything happening now, but the United States of America. Find understanding her role.
Oh, they cut this off. Oh, he's got like, I think he has like a whole 5 or 10 minutes.
Not only do we have the largest economy in the world, we have the strongest economy in the world. We have the most productive workers in the world. And given a fair shot, given a fair chance, Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down. Never. Never.
Was Biden the one or was it Obama? I think it was Biden. One slogan I thought was good, was something like, it's never a good bet to bet against you. I thought that was good.
Ordinary people like us who do extraordinary things. We've had candidates before who attempted to get elected by appealing to our fears. but they've never succeeded because we do not scare easily. We never bow. We never bend. We never break when confronted with crisis. No, we endure. We overcome. And we always, always, always move forward. That's why I can say with absolute conviction, I am more optimistic about our chances today than when I was elected as a 29-year-old kid to the Senate. The 21st century is going to be the American century. Because we lead not only by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. That is the history of the journey of America. And God willing, Hillary Clinton will write the next chapter in that journey. We are America, second to none, and we own the finish line. Don't forget it. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Come on. We're America.
Oh my God, that guy in the back is obsessed. Look, watch this guy in the back.
Come on. We're America.
Watch him. What the fuck? What's he looking at? One day, we're gonna spend an entire stream trying to figure out how to synchronize both my computers. This computer is always consistently runs 3 minutes. Don't know why. It's so fun. Always. Once I restart it, it'll be on time, and eventually it slows down, and then it's 3 minutes. Yeah, it's all of that normal shit is turned on. But it's just like it always like if I turn it off and on, it just falls out. CPU? Oh, uptime. Oh, it's only been 6 days. I usually turn it off when I travel. Can you run a poll for your audience? Trump v. Biden would be interested in the results. You know what? Actually, good question. I wonder my audience... Hold on, I'm pulling all the chats to find out. If you had to vote today, who would you vote for? Don't vote if you're European. Hello. Put the, oh, there you go. Hi.
before, so that's fun.
Yeah. Well, welcome. We're live, so don't give any personal revealing information or say anything crazy.
Sounds good.
Do you want to introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Sure. I'm Omar Badar. I'm a Palestinian American. I've been active on this issue for pretty much my entire adult life. Studied it in school, and yeah, I've done a ton of advocacy on it, and it's an issue that I think American foreign policy is a disaster on, and has been for a very, very long time, and one in which I think it's essentially a moral blight on America's conscience to pretend that we have come such a long way on a wide range of issues in terms of opposition to racism and apartheid, and looking at all the stuff that we've done in our history as long past, and then supporting what I view as a policy that is completely inexcusable in terms of what Israel has been doing to Palestinians for decades now, and the U.S. insisting on unlimited military, diplomatic, and financial support.
All right. Well, where do you want to start? I saw you tweeted at me. The other guy tweeted at me. So, yeah. Are you familiar with anything I've shown on the topic?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I mean, look, what I saw is your debate with Ben Shapiro, and, you know, it's obviously not much of a debate because I think you're a little bit out of your depth with this particular issue, and that's not like a criticism of you. I mean, nobody can be an expert on every topic in the world, so nonetheless, you nodded along to a ton of nonsense that you said, so I think you gave him way too many passes. And then separately, just there's a clip of you circulating online saying that you support genociding Palestinians. I imagine that's a joke. I don't think it's a funny one, given everything that is happening now. But yeah, that's basically my exposure of your stuff on this particular topic, and happy to start it however you want. I don't know what's the best angle on this.
Do you want to do the? Well, you comment there were parts that I let Ben Shapiro slide on, and I imagine I probably said or in agreement. Yeah, do you want to start on those?
Sure, let's do that. So, I mean, honestly, a couple of things. Big picture, Israel has been practicing apartheid against Palestinians for a very, very long time. Their occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem is illegal under international law. The United Nations has called on Israel to withdraw from these territories repeatedly. Eventually, Palestinians came along to acknowledge the fact that they are the weaker party and cannot reclaim their entire historic homeland, settled for a land division in which Israel gets to keep 80% of the territory, which is Israel as recognized by the UN, and Israel is obligated to withdraw from those occupied territories, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And that was the idea behind the so-called peace process. And what Israel did throughout that entire peace process is build more and more settlements throughout the occupied territories. They entrenched that occupation. They made it impossible for Palestinians to have any path towards genuine independence. And every human rights organization in the world at this point, all the big ones, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and even Israel's largest human rights organization, B'Tselem, all acknowledge that Israel is practicing apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories, at least, and some of them go to say apartheid in all of Israel, frankly, in which one set of people gets rights on account of being Jewish Israelis, and then different categories of Palestinians getting fewer and fewer rights, and an act of ethnic cleansing in slow motion that we've been watching for decades. And Palestinians have pursued every method possible to achieve freedom, and all of them have led to a dead end because Israel has no interest in allowing Palestinians to live as a free people. That is the fundamental reality. And everything that you can accuse Palestinians of having done wrong towards Israel or Israelis, Israel has done to Palestinians at 100 times greater scale. That's a fundamental injustice in which, when you look back at, say, South Africa, we can understand that the ANC sometimes set off bombs and killed white people in South Africa, and you can say that's wrong. Of course it is. But the fundamental reality is that unless you solve the underlying injustice, you're not going to get anywhere better. And this seems to be a part of the conversation that is entirely missed or ignored or overlooked here, is that until you solve the problem of Israeli occupation and apartheid, this kind of going back and forth about individual acts of violence and kind of doing this both sides nonsense where we pretend like all sides are equally guilty of everything or whatnot, is really missing a fundamental reality, which is Palestinians are an oppressed and occupied people. Israel is an oppressor and an occupier force supported by the United States, and that gives Israel a sense of impunity that allows it to carry on doing whatever the hell it wants at the expense of people and their fundamental ability to live in freedom and human rights.
Okay. I'll just give I'll give like an overtake on what you said, and then we can kind of like dive into any individual thing if you want.
Sure.
I'm wholly uninterested in the apartheid claims. They might be true, they might not be true. The issue that I have with talking and fixating so much on the apartheid stuff is I feel like the apartheid is a consequence of the occupation. That Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip are probably never going to have the same rights living under military tribunals and living as not an actual country under occupying power like Israel. I don't even know if I would expect it. I think the reason why people, I read the UN's, I read an article sites. I don't know if call it essentially they call it apartheid from what I've gathered because of the enduring conditions of the occupation. So for instance, with a 5-year occupation, we probably wouldn't use the term apartheid, but since it's been going on almost indefinitely and it feels like there's no end to it, well, now if this is the permanent country that you're going to be born into and die in, and you're living as a second-class citizen, it's kind of apartheid. So I agree that there is like apartheid, or at least some form of apartheid. I kind of agree with that. I just don't think that's ever going to be fixed insofar as like it's an occupied area. Like, you would never expect an occupying power to give the same rights to occupiers. So I think that the fixation has to be on solving the occupation, whether that means giving them the country or whatever that means. That's the solution to the apartheid part. Apartheid is never getting fixed as long as it's an occupation. For the second thing, for the peace process, we can dive into these in particular. Israel just built more and more settlements. I think after the Oslo Accords, Israel actually slowed down on the settlements in the West Bank almost entirely. Even under Netanyahu, even if the numbers of settlements built, they were expanding within settlements. No new settlements being constructed, and the construction of homes within the settlements that did exist actually slowed down dramatically in the 1930s. When we said it made it impossible for Palestinians to pursue peace, I think Palestinians made it impossible to pursue peace, but we can talk about that. The active ethnic cleansing in slow motion, if it's ethnic cleansing or genocide, is probably one of the least effective ethnic cleansings or genocides I've ever seen in my life. I think that's kind of what it's random. When we say Palestinians pursue peace in 2010, I completely and utterly disagree. I think that Israel has made a few really good faith efforts towards trying to pursue peace with Palestinians, but not. And I think that's why Arafat walked away from things like the Camp David summit in 2000, or why parameters everything was shot down. I don't know if the Palestinians are seriously considered a peace process that involves a two-state solution. I feel like they're only going to a one-state solution. I think most of the population polling data says that one-state solution through violence with unequal rights and preference. And then I would wholly reject any comparisons to the ANC. The ANC didn't target civilians. The ANC didn't believe in like martyrdom or shaheed. The ANC, didn't have suicide bombers running into buses. The ANC wasn't committing intifadas, especially the second intifada from 2000-2004. I just don't think that the ANC has any resemblance whatsoever to the Palestinian people or the current Palestinian struggle. I know people like to draw comparisons to South Africa because they want to lean into that apartheid comparison, but I think it's pretty wacky when you look at the stated goals and how both sides conduct themselves to compare the two. Yeah, we can go into whatever part here you want. We can dive as deep as you want into it. Yeah.
Happy to talk about them one at a time. Sure. And again, I really hope that my tone does not come across as condescending. Just your information about this is simply inaccurate. It's factually incorrect. I'm happy to just share the correct information with you.
Yeah, go for it.
On terms of the settler population in the West Bank settlement expansion did not slow down. The settler population between 1993 and 2000 actually doubled. So when the peace process meant that Israel was going to withdraw from these occupied territories, I just want to be clear, every single one of these settlements is illegal under international law. It's just building colonies. If Russia were to come and invade the United States and start building exclusivist Russian cities where they push Americans out of cities in California and bring Russians to live in those cities, the correct response is we have to dismantle that. That is not allowed to exist. So existing Israeli settlements were illegal to begin with throughout the West Bank. And Israel responded not by dismantling settlements, but by expanding settlements. And that population expanded very, very rapidly throughout the so-called peace process. So Israel was basically playing a game. They were withdrawing from certain major cities in the Palestinian territories. They let the Palestinians control Ramallah. They let the Palestinians control Jericho. But effectively, in terms of control of the West Bank entirely, Israeli control of the West Bank was actually expanding. So that's the reason why the so-called peace process failed. Now, if you look at it from the perspective of somebody like Bill Clinton or mainstream American officials, they'll put the blame on Palestinians for the failure of the peace process on the grounds that they should have just been grateful for whatever Israelis were willing to give them. But the reality is The most generous offer that Israel made Palestinians towards statehood came in 2000. It's known as the Camp David II Accords. And Israel's foreign minister at the time, his name is Shlomo Ben Ami. You can look up his debate with Norman Finkelstein on Democracy Now! He said, Israel's foreign minister said, if I were Palestinian, I would not have accepted that deal. So that gives you a sense of how little meaningful control Israel was going to cede towards Palestinians. That Israel was going to be effectively control of all their borders and all of their land, that you go from one Palestinian city to another, you have to go through an Israeli checkpoint or a method of control. That's not freedom and that's not statehood. That is effectively a pretense of a state that is living under effective Israeli control.
Sure.
Now,
so, my understanding is the population was growing in 2000, but there were no new settlements started, and then construction within the settlements slowed significantly, such that prior to 93, I think it was like on average, like 13,000 to 14,000 new housing units were constructed every single year. And then I think it was from 94 or 93 to, I think it was to 97, that number was like less than 5,000. It was only new housing units that were being constructed, and there were no new settlements created.
No.
So
the settler population expanded from over 100,000.
I understand. So when we say settler population, that's different than new settlements, right?
Yes, and expanding settlements. I mean, just for clarity's sake, I feel like we can get into the weeds on this.
I want to get into the weeds. That's where I want to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
We go very into the weeds. I think it's very important to get into the weeds on this because there's a lot of stuff in the weeds
totally
that people
fine.
seem to miss. Yeah. So I think I agree with you that the settlement population basically doubled from 93 to 2000. But there were no new settlements made, and there was only expansion within settlements. And even that expansion within settlements slowed quite a bit. It was cut by about 66%.
The word within the settlements, I think, is a little bit misleading because these settlements expand outwards. Construction, the act of pushing Palestinians out of their land in order to expand settlements is an ongoing process. So Palestinians were losing land in the West Bank while Israel was expanding settlements at a time when the entire idea was that Israel was going to withdraw from the occupied territories from the West Bank to allow Palestinians to exist. So Israel was doing the exact opposite of what it was obligated to do.
Well, so I agree that there's like expansion, but one of the big things about the Oslo Accords was hopefully no new settlements. Now, that wasn't even technically a formal agreement, and there was no formal agreement in place from 90 onwards yet to completely withdraw from the West Bank because they had to set that deal out, right? The Oslo Accords was really only establishing the Palestinian Authority government and starting to hand over basically security arrangements for Palestinians, which is kind of going to Strip. And then hopefully that would lead to, I think the goal was originally 5 years, it got pushed to 7, and then the other part of the same thought happened. But the goal was that hopefully after 5 years of this transitional government, there would be a new enduring peace process that would be negotiated. But for the Oslo Accords, very specifically, there were no actual agreements made about what it would look like in 5 years because they just weren't ready to negotiate.
Yeah, I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. The idea is Israel's presence in the West Bank is illegal. They have to leave.
There's something as illegal or illegal. It's not really an issue. Like everything here, the legality of all of it is not illegal in this jurisdiction.
International law is very clear.
International law is not clear. International law is incredibly ambiguous. Israel and plenty of the surrounding states aren't signatories to the ICC. In order for the ICJ to make a ruling on something, you have to submit yourself before to the ICJ and say they even can. So I mean, like to say that like international law is clear here, like people have opinions, sure. But like all of this is incredibly murky. Like there are some readings of international law that would say technically the only people that own any land here is an emerging state in a conflict in which Israel was the only emerging state post-48. So there's an argument to be made that like Israel owns all the land technically. So, I mean, like to say international law is clear here is
anybody can say whatever they want. That is true. However, the consensus is the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, and every major human rights organization in the world. If you want to take all of those and say their opinion matters as much as bumfuck whatever somebody sitting in their basement and spouting about what legality means, you can do that. But I think we are pretty damn clear about the fact that international law, UN Resolution 242 that came immediately after Israel took over the West Bank, said the acquisition of territory by war is illegal under international law. That's what the resolution said, and said based on that, Israel is obligated to withdraw from the occupied territories. Israel did not want to withdraw from the occupied territories. There was a thing there about how first you need reciprocation of Palestinians recognizing Israel. That came at the beginning of the so-called peace process. So the Palestinians fulfilled the first half of that in order to insist on that being a condition. And Israel responded by expanding its occupation. And so the International Court of Justice in 2004 weighed in on Israel building a wall throughout the West Bank. And they said, frankly, their explanation for building that wall, they're building it within occupied territory, they're building it to protect illegal settlements that are built on top of Palestinian land. All of that is illegal, and so that wall is also illegal. So this is really straightforward, and I think that we do the audience of this service by pretending that there's a lot of kind of murky, this talk of disputed territories in the Palestinian territories, I think, is extremely unhelpful, because the dispute is between Israel on the one hand and the rest of the world on the other. There's been a short exception to that, which is when Trump came into office, he joined Israel into declaring that the occupation and the settlements are not illegal. But again, I would not want to be on the side of Trump and Netanyahu. I would rather be on the side of the entire international human rights consensus and international law consensus on this, which is that Israel's occupation and settlements and wall in the West Bank are absolutely categorically illegal. I would like to touch on a couple of other...
I mean, like, again, like, the legality question here, first of all, when we're citing, like, human rights organizations or human General Assembly, like, all the UN General Assembly resolutions are not binding. The resolution it doesn't really make sense. And I like advisory opinions or opinions given by, like, UN General Assembly bodies. It just doesn't really and again, like, the legality, like, the opinions of the ICJ that's being asked to give an opinion on something where neither territory is actually submitting themselves to the jurisdiction or rulings of the ICJ, because insofar as international law goes, I mean, they're nice arguments and we can use them, I guess, if we feel like they're bolstering something, but they don't really address any issues on the ground, and they don't really get us any closer to an actual peace process. I think even you would agree that screaming at this over and over, like, hey, there are some people that think that what you're doing is illegal, doesn't really get us anywhere.
I think when one country steals land from another people against international law and is ethnically cleansing them in slow motion, pushing them out of their homes, driving them out of their home to the condemnation of every human rights organization in the world, I think screaming at them about that is the right thing to do. And
sure,
it comes down to the governments that are supplying and enabling that. The United States government should not be sending weapons to a country that is engaging in human rights violations and land theft on this scale. That's the fundamental reality. Look,
when we say, okay, so like, we can go into this as deep as you want to. I'd love to. When we say steals land from another people, when we say Israel steals land from another people, what does that mean?
It means Palestinians have Israeli soldiers. I can send you videos if you have not seen them.
Okay.
Who knock on their doors in a place like occupied East Jerusalem, which again, under international law, which you don't seem to care so much about. I mean, by the way, if you want to go down that line of dismissing international law, then by all means, Russia invading Ukraine is just fine. And if China wants to take over part of the United States, that's also okay. Who's to say it's all disputed? I don't think that's a useful frame of reference.
Well, I don't think China invading countries or Russia invading countries is a lot different. People have internationally recognized sovereign states with borders that even those countries have recognized. That's a lot different than whatever the situation is right now with Israel. When we say Israel stealing land from people, who is Israel stealing land from? And you pointed back to Resolution 242. What is that referring to? Who do they steal land from?
Resolution 242 says that Israel taking over the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem violates international law because those are not part of Israel. At the time, the West Bank was under Jordanian control and Gaza was under Egyptian control.
Wait, no, wait. They weren't under. They were part of those countries, right? They weren't. They didn't belong to Palestine. What Jordan literally made. Why do you think Jordan today is 2/3 Palestinians? They literally gave citizenship and basically
No. You're confused. Jordan was not part of Jordan officially. Jordan right now, but Jordan is not. Yeah, the West Bank is not part of Jordan. So when Israel was founded in 1948, they took over 78% of historic Palestine. The parts they did not take over were the West Bank and Gaza, and that's when those areas fell under Jordanian control and Egyptian control.
Correct. Jordan annexed the West Bank in 1950. They literally annexed it. They gave citizenship. Yes, literally. They literally did. It was, yes. That's why it was called.
No. The impression that I'm under right now is that you want to debate semantics about all of this and refusing, again, insisting on getting into a level of weeds here that is designed specifically to miss the overarching picture.
Okay.
The overarching picture, again, for simplicity's sake, the entire world agrees that the West Bank is not part of Israel and Israel is obligated to withdraw from it. Israel entered a peace process in 1993 that is premised on withdrawing from the occupied territories They did the opposite.
The Oslo Accords were not premised on that. The Oslo Accords. No, they weren't.
They were premised on the idea of creating a Palestinian state within 5 years in the occupied territory.
There were no concrete resolutions set on the Oslo Accords. That's why in 5 years they needed to revisit to do an actual peace process. The Oslo Accords did not make any actual commitments. Also, it's very annoying that people accuse me of not knowing anything about this topic, but then I understand when you're debating this, you don't know anything about the topic, and that's why you get upset when you talk about like getting into the weeds. Even that quote you gave earlier from the Israeli foreign minister about how like I wouldn't have accepted the deal if I was a Palestinian. That's not what he said. That's not what that quote says. If you actually go to the book and actually read the passage where he talks about it, what he said was that conditions were not right at the time for Palestinians to feel like they could accept that deal. But he was talking about the conditions that existed throughout the country, not that it was a bad deal. Universally, every other person in the Arab world, the Egyptian leadership, Saudi foreign ambassador, said that these deals were amazing, that what was coming after Camp David, what was being negotiated at the Tabla Summit, these were unbelievable deals, that Arafat went into these things expecting 91% of the land, and by the end, with land swaps, he was getting 95 to 97% of the original land that the Palestinians had. The idea that these were horrible deals that were being put before them is not true. And the idea that the Oslo Accords were some permanently negotiated peace status is also not true. That's why there was going to be another meeting in 5 years to figure out what the permanent arrangements would be. I don't agree that any of this is getting lost in the weeds. I think it's really important to know the specifics.
No, I'm catching on to your style about this. I think you're less interested in the actual topic and more interested in winning an argument based on kind of like silly manufactured points. It's quite transparently what is happening here.
Wait, don't you think it's important to understand, like, what Jordan's goal was when they invaded the West Bank, or what Egypt was doing when they invaded the Gaza Strip, rather than just screaming apartheid over and over again?
I think it's important to engage in good faith and to know what you're talking about and to not say things that you don't understand. I've watched that debate with Israel's foreign minister on more than one occasion. What he was saying is that the deal that was offered to Palestinians in Camp David was a bad deal, and if you were Palestinians, you would not have accepted it. And
that's literally not what he said. If you watch the debate, and I watched that debate, it was literally not hosted on Democracy Now!, and he's quoting his own book, and if you go back and read the book instead of just watching the YouTube video, you'll see the context of what was given. And what was given was that
we'll make that available. I'm glad you're saying that. I think we're going to be able to put this up. I'm going to put up that part of the debate. We're going to put it up there with a quote to the book, which I have sitting on my shelf. I'm happy to do all of this.
I hope they're your quotes and not quotes from the book about what the interview was.
No, don't worry. It'll be a clip of Shlomo Ben Ami speaking in his own words. I'm happy to put that together. Now, would you like to move on to the current situation, or would you like to still debate the peace process specifically? I'm happy to do either.
Well, the problem is in the current situation, there's so many bad allusions to history that's not true that it makes it hard to understand whether...
History is rather straightforward. Palestinians are being denied freedom because Palestinians is not allowing them to be free. That is all there is to say about it. It literally is documented bit by bit. Palestinians are living under Israeli control. By the way, this is part kind of thing that you seem to be so dismissive of. From the river to the sea, the only government that is in charge in any meaningful sense is the Israeli government. There is limited self-governance in the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. There is limited self-governance in Gaza under Hamas. But Israel controls the borders of everyone. Nobody can visit Gaza or the West Bank without going through an Israeli border. Gaza does not have an airport. This is before October 7th.
Wait, you can't get into Gaza without going through an Israeli border?
Without Israeli permission, or on the Egyptian side, effectively the Egyptian government is working in collaboration with the Israeli government. However, this idea that Gaza's occupation ended when Israel was re-settlers in 2005 is a complete and total lie. And the simple evidence of it is, there was an airport in Gaza that Israel bombed, and Gaza was never allowed to rebuild an airport. There is a seaport, in theory, that you could have in Gaza, but Israel does not allow anyone to visit Gaza without going through Israeli checks. And in some cases...
When we're looking at these restrictions here, why does Egypt restrict access to the Gaza Strip if it's so horrible what Israel's doing? Why does Jordan restrict access to the West Bank if it's so horrible what Israel's doing?
Yeah, and in the case of the West Bank, it's an Israeli border control that you're going through, not a Jordanian one. So Israel is in control of the West Bank. In the case of Gaza and Egypt, the Egyptian government effectively is on the U.S.-Israeli team. That is really effectively what there is to say about that. So they work in collaboration to advance the shared interests of Egypt, of the United States.
That's the only reason why Egypt doesn't want Palestinians that come from the Gaza Strip to weapons or anything like that.
Egypt does not like the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
No. But still, again, well, thank you for the 1,000 deviations. I get what you're saying.
They're not thousands of deviations. They're important to understand the history. Because,
They're
again, you
not
misrepresent this
important
as just Israel, the big bad bully, oppressing
here's
the
thing.
Palestinians.
No,
right?
here's what you don't understand.
Tell
I
me.
don't care if Egypt wants to close its border
Okay.
with Gaza. They're welcome to do that. I don't care if Israel wants to close its border with Gaza. By all means, do that. But when Israel imposes a blockade on Gaza and doesn't allow them to have an airport and doesn't allow ships to come into Gaza, that is not ending the occupation. That is Israel very much being in charge.
Sure.
And owning
Why does the
Gaza.
blockade exist?
And, well, let me ask you this question in relation to that. Why does that blockade exist? Did you know that at the beginning of the blockade, potato chips were not allowed in? Sodas were not allowed in? Cookies were not allowed in? Can you explain to me what threat cookies pose to Israel from your perspective?
Well, if they're the Keebler Elf ones, it's like 200 calories a cookie, so maybe they just didn't want people getting fat. Why does the blockade exist for the Gaza Strip? Why is there a blockade at all?
So because the blockade included food items, and I will tell you what the Israeli officials said at the time when they imposed the blockade.
Okay.
They said they want to put the people of Gaza on a diet and restrict their caloric intake as a means of making life uncomfortable for the civilian population so that they would put pressure on the Hamas government.
Okay.
That is an act of collective punishment
Yeah.
that violates international law, which I know you don't care much about international law. Clearly, you think it's a dispute that anybody can just pull out of their ass and think whatever they want about. But punishing civilian populations in order to produce a political change is practically the definition of terrorism. So you have a population that is experiencing humanitarian hardship by design by a country that dominates their lives.
Gotcha.
A country
Wait,
that
so
owes them. It's
why
a
does the
religious
blockade? Why does the blockade exist?
Because Hamas does not want to play ball with Israel. That's why. Israel
What does
had
that mean?
two hands.
Hamas doesn't want to play ball with Israel. This is like the
Yes.
fourth time I've asked the question. I'm just curious. Why would Israel
Sure.
put up a blockade? Was it just to starve those poor people? Why don't they have a blockade in the West Bank?
Because Hamas does not have a peace agreement with Israel. Hamas
That's
is
it? That's
committed-
the only
yes.
reason? Just because they
Yes,
don't have a
Hamas
peace
is
agreement?
committed- Well, Israel had 3 conditions for Hamas in order for them to establish normal relations and for there not to be a blockade. They wanted them to be a replica
Okay.
of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They said you have to recognize Israel, you have to renounce violence, and you have to abide by all previous agreements that Israel had made with the Palestinian Authority. Now, what's ironic about that is that Israel does not recognize Palestine. Israel does not renounce violence and engages in military attacks on Palestinians all the time. And Israel clearly does not abide by the previous agreements because they violated them over and over and over again by undermining the prospect of an emerging Palestinian state. So Israel wanted to hold Hamas to a standard that Israel itself was not being held to. And that brings us back to a fundamental relationship of dominance between Israel and the Palestinians. Israel believes and feels as if it can order Palestinians to do whatever Israel wants, and they have to obey, and the opposite relationship is not required. That Israel can take whatever lands it wants, can control whatever borders it wants, and Palestinians have to obey. Let me ask you this and flip it around. If Hamas had put a blockade on all of Israel and said we're going to cut off certain foods from the Israeli population to make them uncomfortable and lower their caloric intake until the Israeli government agrees to A, B, and C, what would your reaction to that be?
Well, first, I would really want to know, why does Israel blockade the Gaza Strip? I think it's the 5th time I asked this question.
I've answered you already. It's
didn't.
because Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, and Israel does not like Hamas. They see them as a hostile entity, and they said you have to meet certain requirements in order for us to end the blockade. And to reiterate once more, the blockade cannot be justified on security grounds because part of what was not being allowed in were things that were explicitly meant to harm the civilian population within Gaza.
Okay.
It is not a military blockade
Yeah.
that is done for security purposes if you're restricting people from being able to eat cookies and chips and sodas in Gaza.
So one of the things that's frustrating about the Israel-Palestine debate is, like Ben Shapiro, on the other end, you just have people that are blindly partisan. We can't acknowledge at all why Israel would blockade the Gaza Strip. You're going to tell me it was to install these harsh humanitarian conditions that are somehow putting the whole population on a diet and starving them when their population is like tripled? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Why can't we at least acknowledge, like, okay,
What
sure.
doesn't make
Like,
sense about this?
why can't we say, okay, sure, Israel put the blockade up because people like Iran and Turkey were shipping in weapons to the Gaza Strip in submersibles that were used throughout all of Israel during the Second Intifada of 2000-2004. And then once Hamas took over and then essentially ejected Fatah from the region, Israel felt like Hamas was going to continue to engage in attacks against Israel, so they wanted to blockade to prevent weapons from going in. Now, you can say that and still say you feel like Hamas can fight, but why not be honest about why the blockade exists?
no.
And even when
What
you
you
say
just
things
said-
like they were blocking things like sugar-related items, like cookies and everything. Isn't that literally one of the big fields that they used for their early Qassam rockets? Was literally like fertilizer and sugar that they would mix to shoot rockets continuously over into Israel?
Again, do I call you Steven or Destiny? I'm not sure.
Steven is fine.
Steven is fine. Steven, I feel like we're playing a game, and I really am doing my best to have this
Hold on,
exchange
I don't
quickly.
appreciate it playing a game because you're not aware of the underlying facts. If there's something that I said was incorrect or irrelevant, wait, can you point to me exactly what I said was incorrect or irrelevant to what my argument I just made? No, wait, don't. You just tell me for what I just said. What part of that was either incorrect or irrelevant?
Here, let me point it out to you. Please listen very, very carefully. I'm going to be as clear as I can be.
I feel like you're just going to do another talking point. You're not actually going to address anything I just said, but okay.
When I tell you, I'm going to address it extremely directly.
Okay.
Let me see how directly I can. I'm going to do my best to state this in a way that everybody can be very clear about what I'm saying.
Okay.
When I tell you that Israel prevented food items from going into Gaza, including potato chips, and that Israeli officials said they want to put people in Gaza on a diet and lower their caloric intake, and you respond by saying sugar can be used for Qassam rockets, you're playing a game. You're not engaging with this seriously. I am pointing out to you that Israeli officials restricted food going into Gaza, and they explicitly said it is for the purpose of making civilians uncomfortable. Can you engage honestly in this point that I just made right now?
I am aware that there are quotes from Israeli leadership that are definitely unhinged when it comes to people in the Gaza Strip sometimes, or Palestinians in general. But when I try to look at like what is the ultimate outcome, what's actually happening, are the people in Gaza being starved? When that population has exploded, one of the highest birth rates in the past 2 decades, I don't understand how they could sustain it if they didn't have food.
If you want to judge it exclusively by that people are still able to have children when they're being treated like utter garbage, that means they're not being treated so bad.
We weren't talking about being treated like utter garbage. Your implication was that they're being starved.
Yeah, the Israeli officials said, by the way, and you know why that blockade why they started letting food into Gaza after that? Because a series of humanitarian ships known as the Turkish flotilla at the time tried to break through that siege to deliver food and medicine to Gaza in protest of Israel's unlawful siege.
First of all, those ships weren't trying to deliver food and aid. Those ships were just there as protest. No, they weren't. 3 of the 5 ships were empty. I'm very familiar with the flotilla incident. If you're not, I would not go here because this was clearly a political stunt that was done. There's video footage of the people on the boats fighting the IDF. There were firearms and everything collected from the boat. They were literally trying.
This is not a good faith conversation. It really is.
How is it not? Because you're not familiar with any of the details of what you're talking about? Because you only have talking points?
Who cares about an empty ship?
Because if your goal is to bring humanitarian supplies, why is over half your fleet empty? Because their goal wasn't to bring humanitarian supplies. It was to create propaganda talking points of people like you. They had no desire to actually bring humanitarian supplies there. The Coast Guard, Israel literally said, if you want to bring them in, park here, and we can wheel it in after we inspect the cargo.
Israel wants to control what's being let in and let out.
Of course, because these people have been sending rockets at them for the past 20 years. Yeah, they do. They literally are doing it. Yes.
No, they do not get to do that. They do not get to do that. They don't own the Gaza Strip any more than Hamas gets to control Israel's borders, because Israel receives weapons from the United States and uses them to impose an illegal occupation on Palestinians and destroy their homes and take over their land. Would you accept a Hamas blockade that any ship that is going to Tel Aviv has to stop and Hamas has to inspect it to make sure American weapons are not on it?
No, of course not.
You would not. And that's that you're putting your finger exactly on what the problem is. You're saying Israel gets to act as if it owns the Palestinians.
Because they do. They control all that space. Yes.
No, they don't get to control that space.
They literally do. They literally have been. Yes.
Yes. That's called an illegal occupation. That is what that is. They're controlling other people against their will in violation of international law. That's the whole point. Palestinians are not free. That is the fundamental reality.
What do you think is if Palestinians don't want a 2-state solution, what is Israel supposed to do?
Yeah, Palestinians bent over backwards to try to allow for a Palestinian state to emerge, for a 2-state solution to exist. Again,
what happened in 2000 when Arafat literally walked away from Camp David, when nothing further was solidified in the Taba summit?
Walked away after 7 years of a fake peace process in which Israel claimed that they were going to withdraw from the occupied territories, and what they did instead is expand more and more settlements and entrench their occupation in the West Bank.
No new settlements were created. They didn't claim they were going to fully withdraw because nothing was on the table. That's just not what the Oslo Accords were about. Arafat signed these and he was happy about them, and he went to the negotiating table in 2000. Nobody says that he walked away because he was...
You're repeating talking points that you simply don't know and don't understand. That's the reality. Palestinians wanted...
I mean, like, so he didn't walk away. Why did he even start the negotiations in 2000 if he just didn't want to do them?
I'll tell you what the negotiations were about. He started the negotiations because he thought that Israel was going to allow for a Palestinian state to exist. And 7 years later, they realized that Israel was playing a game, that they were not serious about ending the occupation, that they never froze settlement building. That's one of the things you nodded along when Ben Shapiro said it.
Because
Israel
they didn't build
never
new settlements.
Israel did not once freeze settlement building. Every American president had pleaded with them to stop building settlements, and Israel never did. They announced settlement freezes in which East Jerusalem was excluded, even though East Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory, in which they can slow it down here and slow it down there, but there was never, ever a serious commitment to end the land theft of Palestinians, to end the expansion of that land theft.
And I think the reason why is because there was never a serious commitment by Palestinians to a two-state solution.
That's nonsense. The Palestinians made the offer quite open. When you look at, they said, when you talk about Arafat walking away, the Palestinian position is, end the occupation, go back to the 67 borders, you get to keep 80% of the land, we get 20%. And Israel said,
well, I don't know what the 80-20% is. You can't. There is no.
Israel, as recognized by international law right now, is about 78% of historic Palestine.
We're not. No one is talking about historic Palestine. Right? We're way past that. Now we're at the. Palestinians and Arabs already said no to that when in 47, with the initial UN partition. So we already ignored that. So that's gone. That's off the table.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at.
This is insufferable. No, it's not gone. I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't get to say. You don't get to have an agreement on the table and then say no. Actually, we're going to try to kill all of you. And then when you fail, go okay. Well, let's go back to that agreement. 47 and 48 is off the table.
Let's go over this again. And please, seriously, I'm asking you. I get that you have a dynamic with your followers or whatever, and like you're winning arguments and doing great. Please try to listen genuinely and sincerely for a moment. Palestinians in 1947 were being asked to give up more than half of their country to allow for the creation of a Jewish state, and they said no to that.
What country?
What do you mean, what country? It doesn't have to be a sovereign country.
There was no country there. There were a collection of tribes and people that lived there, subsistence farmers. There was no country of Palestine.
They lived there. That's all that matters. This is like saying that white settlers taking over the United States was fine.
You keep bringing up the United States. The United States is a sovereign state with recognized borders. You just said that there was no sovereign state of Palestine in 47.
Native Americans did not have a sovereign state that was recognized by the UN. When European settlers were pushing Native Americans out of their lands here, we recognized that as wrong, even though there was not a sovereign state. When Israel was created, a series of massacres were committed against Palestinian towns and villages. 700,000 people were driven from their homes.
First of all, 700. So it was like 20,000 people. I think 10 to 20,000 people were driven from their homes. The rest left because they were worried about violence. But not 700,000 people weren't driven from their homes.
Yeah, you can. If that's a distinction that is meaningful to you, you're free. You're free to feel that.
Distinction is absolutely. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. Would you agree then? Would you agree that millions of Jews were driven from their homes across the entirety of all the Arab states after 48, after 67, after 73?
Hundreds of thousands. Yes, and I think that there is a plausible case to make for that being the correct language for it. And frankly, there is admissions of Zionists playing a part in that to try to make Jews feel less safe in other parts of the Middle East in order to drive them to Israel. Again, not history I'm expecting you to be familiar with, and that's okay.
I'm super familiar.
But for the sake of not missing the core argument that you brought up that I want to mention.
Okay.
When Israel was created, more than 500 Palestinian towns and villages were erased. And the reason why they were erased is because they did not want Palestinians to be able to come back. If Palestinians, let's take your argument. Let's say Palestinians packed up and left in 1948 on their own. They went to vacation. They packed up and went to Disneyland. Why are they not allowed to return? What exactly gives Israel the right to say that these refugees don't get to come back home? They don't have that right. So the point is...
Why don't they get to return? It's because they left and then they waged war against Israel to try to destroy them. Why would you want them back after?
Who's the they? The civilian population?
The civilian population surrounding Arab states, yes.
Yeah, so Israel imposed itself on Palestinians, engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing, drove them out of their homes and took over their land and created a Jewish state.
So
and then,
Israel in 47, okay, the Brits gave a potential split for who would own what land.
Yeah.
And there was land where...
Just for the record, just to be clear, the Brits being the colonizers of that area at the time. So not exactly the people with the most, in the best moral position to be dictating what...
Sure, as opposed to the Ottomans that had colonized it hundreds of years before.
Yeah, the Ottomans were not the ones trying to create that division. So that point is neither here nor there.
Because the Ottoman Empire collapsed, because it was gone. But I'm just saying that regardless, Britain had the territory. They were the ones with the mandate to administer to it. That was the agreement.
The point is importing a Jewish population from Europe and then trying to force the Palestinian population living on the land to leave parts of it in order to allow for a Jewish state to be created is morally wrong. That is.
I mean, like it's complicated. I mean, they purchased the
Is
land. Yeah, it is. It is
They did
complicated.
not purchase the land.
They
No,
did. A
by
lot
the-
of it was purchased. Yeah, the Surstock
By
purchase. They
the
were huge.
time- Again, you don't know the details, and that's okay. By the time 1948 rolled along, in 1947, when the division of land was coming, the Jewish population made up about 90% of the land, and they owned less. I'm trying to now figure out if I'm mixing up the population and the land ownership. The land ownership was 7 to 9% at the time, and the land division in 1947 that was offered to them gave more than 50% of historic Palestine to a Jewish population that owned 7 to 9% of the land.
That's partially true, but they weren't giving it. That partition plan for the Jewish state wasn't initially given only to Jews. The division of population would have been 55% Jews, 45% Arabs that lived there, which kind of hurts the idea that Jews wanted to expel all the Arabs from the land. That expulsion didn't come until after all the surrounding Arab states declared war on the newly emerging state of Israel in an attempt to expel them from the region. What part of what I just said was incorrect? You keep saying no and then not actually.
I'll tell you which part of what you said is incorrect.
Okay.
30% of the population of the 700,000 plus Palestinians who were driven out before 1948. Before the neighboring Arab armies got
yes,
involved.
because there was a civil war that started. Correct, because there was a civil war that started that went from 47 to 49 in that territory. That civil war started because Arabs rejected the partition plan, and then they started to go hard. They wanted to fight. Yes, they rejected the partition plan. They started to fight. Obviously, Israel, not Israel yet, but the Irgun, the Haganah, and the third one, the pre-IDF people started to defend themselves as the Arabs started to fight their villages. There was a civil war that started in 47, and then in 48, all after Israel declares independence, all of the surrounding Arab states decided that they're also going to join and go to war, and unfortunately for them, I guess Israel won that war, and then a lot of Palestinians fled their villages afterwards because they were worried that their villages were going to get destroyed, and Israel started to grab land, and Jordan grabbed land. That's when they got the West Bank and then annexed it. That's when Egypt came in and they grabbed land. They got the Gaza Strip. That's what happened afterwards. But I mean.
No, this is honestly a remarkable attempt at having a conversation.
What did I just say that was incorrect?
The militias that you described pre-1948, before they became the IDF, were considered, many of them, terrorist groups.
The Irgun was, the Haganah not as much. It really depends on who you're talking about.
And they've engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing. They've gone into Palestinian towns and villages, and they've executed people en masse to drive people out. Those are the actions that they engaged in that you just described as self-defense. And honestly,
some of it was self-defense, some of it was massacres. Absolutely, of course. They were massacring people on both sides. I'm not saying that the pre-IDF wars, and even afterwards, Israel's engaged in massacres in towns, horrible ones in Lebanon. Like, I'm not going to say they're totally innocent, of course. But it's not just one side is the aggressor and the other side is this innocent party that is doing nothing. There was Arab violence against Israelis pre-48,
I'll tell you what. Just for the sake of trying to salvage whatever could be possibly productive, I would like to move to what is happening now in Gaza from October 7th, what the immediate precedence for October 7th was, and what Israel is currently engaging in Gaza. Can we do that for a little bit?
Sure.
All right. On October 6th, that is one day before the Hamas attack, the people of Gaza had been living under an Israeli blockade for nearly 17 years. During that blockade, half the population of Gaza is unemployed. A greater number of that are considered to be suffering from basically lacking suffering food insecurity. And 97% of the water in Gaza was considered undrinkable. They got about 12 hours a day of electricity, and they could not trade with the outside world, and they could not leave or come. It was essentially what, again, human rights organizations described as an open-air prison. And during that year, just last year, leading up from the beginning of the year until October 6th, Israel had killed more than 250 Palestinians, overwhelmingly in the West Bank, in what human rights organizations have called one of the deadliest years for Palestinian children before October 7th. That was the status quo. Now, the attempts at Palestinian freedom to achieve a situation in which they could live as a free people. They pursued negotiations. Israel did not allow for the creation of a viable Palestinian state and insisted on controlling Palestinians. They pursued economic boycotts. The BDS movement emerged. Israel describes this as economic terrorism and puts pressure on the US, by their own admission, to pass laws that restrict the ability of activists, even here in the United States, to boycott Israel, which actually violates the First Amendment. And that's a whole other conversation I'm happy to get into as well. They have gone to the International Criminal Court. The U.S. puts pressure on the International Criminal Court to keep it from pursuing Israel. Palestinians go to the UN and get their friends to try to pass resolutions at the UN to hold Israel accountable. The U.S. intervenes time after time after time to veto any resolution that tries to hold Israel accountable, to a total of more than 50 UN vetoes from the 1970s until today. And to put that into perspective, that is greater than the number of all vetoes cast by all permanent members of the UN Security Council combined on all issues for that same period. So that's the level of U.S. diplomatic protection that they give to Israel.
It also shows the level of aggression the UN has towards Israel. The UN has done more resolutions condemning Israel than like every other country in the world combined.
I think
there's also something to be said that like when we talk about how like the deplorable food insecurity conditions in Palestine, isn't it something like 25 to 30% of that population is literally obese? Okay, I don't think that the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are suffering from starvation. Okay, now there are issues relating to healthy food. There are issues related to abundance of water. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say the conditions of the Gaza Strip are great. They're obviously not. And in some cases, they're
that's really disgusting, Stephen.
I understand. I know.
Really
I'm sorry. I just wanted to qualify because I know you're about to talk about how October 7th is just the natural outcome of oppressing the people like this, who also, by the way, as they're starving to death, they're also launching rockets for the past 20 years trying to kill civilians in Israel as well, but okay.
No, well, I just wish you could reflect a little bit on what you just said and how incredibly offensive in this case it is. You have a population that is suffering a manufactured humanitarian crisis because they're under a blockade, as every major human rights organization in the world concedes, and you're here making jokes about the population.
Maybe we should take, first of all, I don't care, if you're not in the region, I don't even care what your opinion is. I don't care what South Africa's opinion is on Israel. Why don't we ask questions about the surrounding countries? Why is it the case that Egypt, for instance, also stopped supplying electricity to the Gaza Strip? Why is it that Egypt is equally motivated to maintain the blockade against the Gaza Strip? Why is it that Jordan doesn't seem to care about the border controls? Could it have to do with the fact that in 1970, the PLO and Arafat literally tried to kill the Jordanian king? Why is it that like the only allies that Palestinians have are people like Hezbollah and the Houthis? Like, you can paint these broad pictures about evil BDS is and how evil Israel is, but there are reasons why these conditions exist, and you won't acknowledge any of them. You talk about for 15 years, all they did was suffer these horrible humanitarian conditions. Well, why are they still launching rockets? How can they still launch rockets, thousands of rockets every single year, if there are all these enduring horrible humanitarian conditions?
Yeah, this is hilarious. Yeah, so even in places
I know that you keep saying that. This is hilarious. They don't want to get lost in the weeds. They don't want to deal with the history. You just don't know the facts. And people like you, by the way, are contributing to the enduring bad situations on the ground. Because as long as you continue to think there's only one side here that's doing any wrong, there's never going to be any enduring resolution, any lasting peace.
With all due respect, and I'm not sure how much of it actually is due, we have a reality here where you are not interested in the actual merit of the argument at all, and what you like to do is to try to diffuse the situation. You seem to have this bizarre addiction to the idea that both sides in this issue is the reasonable and sensible thing to do.
Well, to be clear, hold on, I'm sorry. I don't mean to both sides. If I gave you that impression, I mean to both sides. I hold the Palestinians more responsible. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So that's the fun part here, is that you have these people who think that you want to acknowledge this, you want to acknowledge that. They try to diffuse responsibility here and try to mix things up a little bit as a means of trying to seem more reasonable. And I'm sorry, this does not do you any favors in this case. Throughout history, there are oppressed people and there are oppressors, and even though the oppressed sometimes do things that are wrong and morally indefensible, that does not change the fundamental dynamic of an oppressor and an oppressed population. That is the fundamental reality. And you have a situation right now.
To be clear, what you just said, that wasn't the fundamental reality. That was a very generic, vague, random call-out that literally said nothing. There are oppressors and oppressees. Like, what a worthless statement. Like,
yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, who cares? I tell you that every single major human rights organization in the world says that the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is imposed by Israel.
Do you also acknowledge that they say that, for instance, like Hamas uses human shields? Yes. Amnesty International says that.
They do not. See, you don't know what you're talking about.
They don't? You don't think in 2014 in a published report, you don't think Amnesty International has acknowledged that?
You don't know what you're talking about. It's just incredible how little you know. And
okay, well, I've actually read the reports. You should try it sometime. You should read the reports for the flotilla stuff, too, that you try to bring up and you're not aware of. I think it's actually really interesting when you read the actual stuff that happens and not just headlines from
Let me attempt to educate you for the billionth time.
Please, yes, for the billionth, yes.
So, what human rights organizations accuse Hamas of, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, is the fact that they operate in civilian areas and hide in civilian areas which endanger civilians. They acknowledge that much. That is not the legal definition of human shield.
That is the legal definition. I know what you're... Oh, tell me. Please give me the Finkelstein quote. Go ahead. Tell me what the legal definition is. Yeah.
Okay. The use of human shields is placing civilians by force, forcing them against their will to be held in a place in order to deter
I'm
your
aware
enemies.
of this. There is absolutely no. There is no. Hold on. To be clear, for people listening, you can go and look at it if you want. Human Shields, International. I think the Red Cross has a definition of this. Nobody defines human shields as intentionally placing civilians near objects. That is not true. I don't know where Finkelstein got that. It was a quote that came from it's a quote that came. We can give it. I can literally give you from the IHL website. It literally says that if you hold on, I'll find it. I'll search it for you if you want. Go ahead. You can talk while I look for it.
So, while you look for it, let me explain something also to your audience. Do you know who uses human shield in a literal sense?
Oh, Israel does.
IDF does.
So last record, the use of human shields requires an intentional co-location of military objectives and civilians or persons with the specific intent of trying to prevent the targeting of those military objectives. If you station yourself around civilians, you are engaged in using human shields. That's why specifically under international law, the ICC recognizes as well, if you have a civilian location like a hospital that's also housing military targets, that target becomes a military target. You have to do all the collateral assessment and everything, but that's literally how international law is written. Correct. That definition that you gave me for human shields, if you have to force civilians to go to areas, nobody in the international community uses that. Only some pop historians or pop scholars use it because they think it makes their argument sound stronger. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now let me just squeeze in a few more facts to educate the audience. I'm gonna, at this point, try to see if I can just get around the avalanche of nonsense and see if I can.
You keep saying avalanche of nonsense. I mean, I can cite you international law. I can cite you historical facts. I can cite you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Just give me some room to speak. That's wonderful.
Okay.
So the practice of placing civilians in front of you against their will by force was official Israeli policy from the year 2000 until the year 2005. There are literally countless images and videos of Israelis using Palestinian civilians in front of them, putting the gun over their shoulder and walking them into Palestinian homes when they're conducting raids. And the world was naturally outraged. And the Israeli Supreme Court finally came under pressure and issued a law that said that the use of Palestinian civilians as human shields by the Israeli military should not be allowed to continue. They made it illegal.
Gotcha. So to be clear, you're saying before that, you're saying that the Israeli official policy was to use human shields. That was codified as a military doctrine.
That's official
it's so
policy.
Crazy that they say that, yet the only image I've ever seen of the human shield is that one boy on the Jeep that gets posted 50 billion times over and over again. But okay.
So let me again, allow me to educate you just a little bit more.
Go ahead, educate away.
The reason why this is official policy, and the reason I can prove that to you, is because when the Israeli Supreme Court said you don't get to do that anymore, the Israeli military went to court and appealed that decision. The Israeli Defense Ministry said, fuck you, we want to keep using Palestinian civilians as human shields. So, I'm sorry, I know this is inconvenient, I know it hurts your feelings, I know it messes with your idea that the Israelis are wonderful and they're the good guys and the whole Palestinians more responsible and all that other nonsense, but virtually every accusation made by Israel against Palestinians is an admission of an Israeli policy that pretty much matches it word for word. And the problem is that even though that Supreme Court decision by Israel's Supreme Court held, the Israeli military continued using civilians as human shields on a regular basis, regardless of that. There was an incident recounted in 2008 and 2009 when Israel invaded Gaza during that invasion, where they used a 10-year-old Palestinian boy as a human shield. And when they were caught doing it, Human Rights Watch described Israel's punishment of the soldiers as a slap on the wrist. They demoted those soldiers for using a 10-year-old Palestinian boy as a human shield. That kind of punishment, what it tells you, is that Israel does not take seriously this law and effectively turns a blind eye to it whenever their soldiers engage in it. They've engaged in it multiple times since. There is footage from current raids that are taking place in the West Bank this year where they've used Palestinians as human shields. There are incidents that were recounted by human rights organizations from the past few years. This is an ongoing Israeli practice. It is indisputable. It is factually documented. And the fact that the Israeli Defense Ministry and the Israeli military tried to object to the Israeli Supreme Court banning it should tell you everything that you need to know about this. Now, as far as what Hamas does in Gaza, you have a reality is that there is a disparity in power between Palestinian militants who don't have an army, they don't have an air force, they don't have tanks, and so the tactics they use are guerrilla warfare tactics. And anytime you have a force engaging in guerrilla warfare, they can't compete with an army that can just fire a missile from an F-16 and blow you out of existence. So what they do is that they hide in whatever environment they're in. If you're fighting in the jungle, they're hiding in trees. In the case of Gaza, it is almost entirely built from wall to wall. It's
That's not even close to
very
true. Have you
urban
ever seen
area.
a map of Gaza before? That's not
Yes,
true. It's not wall-to-wall buildings. There are plenty of open spaces.
it's an
They just don't
extremely
operate out of
urban
those because they
area.
know they would get targeted.
Yeah, they're an extremely urban area, and so when they engage in guerrilla warfare, they do hide in civilian areas. The intention of that is not to hide specifically. You know, by the way, all these Israeli claims about having a command center under a hospital, which turned out to be false, about, I mean, just the list of Israeli lies about the claims that they have made just in the past few weeks. It's absolutely remarkable. They have just repeatedly made claims that turned out to be false. They've directed people to go to so-called safe zones and then drop 2,000 pound bombs on those safe zones. This was documented even by the New York Times, the fact that they've bombed safe zones with indiscriminate weaponry.
Do you also recognize the documenting that Hamas is launching rockets from declared safe zones as well? Or do you think that that's fake news?
Israel declares those as safe zones, says this is where you have to go, and then drops indiscriminate
bombs. And then Hamas also launches. Well, it's not. Nothing is indiscriminate. Oh, you don't know anything about Hamas launching rockets from those areas. You know every single Israel attack, but not the Hamas ones.
Yeah,
okay.
I know what human rights organizations document.
Well,
yes,
you don't. You clearly didn't know that in
familiar with
2014, Amnesty International said that Hamas was using human shields. So
again, you don't know what you're talking about. There, I'm happy. I will post that report. I'm happy to clip this particular part and post exactly what Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International said during the 2014 war and outline those for you. Now, the point is, when we're talking about what is happening in Gaza, President Joe Biden said Israel is engaging in indiscriminate attacks. Every human rights organization, including now, suddenly you're a fan of Amnesty International, which is great. So Amnesty International accuses Israel of committing war crimes in Gaza, say that they repeatedly, by the way, not just this last onslaught, but repeatedly accuse them of engaging in illegal, unlawful violence against Palestinian civilians. So you take that however you want. If you want, frankly, you bringing up Amnesty International, I think is the cherry on top. If your audience wants to know anything about what Israel is doing in Gaza, I highly recommend they read those reports. And there's no denying that Hamas commits war crimes as well. I mean, you would have to be blind to miss that part. Nonetheless, Israel's war crimes are of far greater scale. It is not even close. And Israel is ultimately responsible for creating a dynamic in which Palestinians are denied freedom, which forces us into a situation in which violence becomes inevitable. People who are upset about apartheid in South Africa, and by the way, the point you made earlier about the ANC not targeting civilians, I would not broadcast that level of ignorance really out loud. You probably should just try to learn a little bit more before you start talking online, because it's really embarrassing for you to not know that the ANC does and has at the time targeted civilians endlessly.
You think the policy of the ANC was to target civilians?
Nelson Mandela was considered a terrorist and placed in prison.
Hold
and
on,
even the United States
I'm sorry.
government.
Considered a terrorist means that they had an explicit policy of targeting civilians?
ANC
Or was he considered a
blew up
terrorist
civilians
because he
all the
stood in
time.
opposition to the South African government and the
You
apartheid
don't know what you're
regime?
talking about. It's incredible. The ANC targeted civilians endlessly. They set off bombs endlessly targeting civilians in South Africa. It
Targeting
really is
civilians, okay.
Yes,
All right.
they have, and you should look it up.
Okay,
And
I
at some
have.
point-
We read all of this. That's not true. The ANC explicitly only tried to target infrastructure and tried to avoid civilian deaths because they knew it would make them look bad. Yeah, of course.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
The ANC came out against killing civilians in 1988. You know how much longer they've been carrying out military operations during the apartheid era, when they finally saw that there is significant international support for their anti-apartheid movement, and they decided to shift policy in the very, very last few years of it? Again, just given the back of knowledge that we have between us, and given the incredible confidence with which you speak and your insistence on kind of diluting the core of the issue, and bringing up about 18,000 facts a second whenever you have something to say, in order for us to not be able to have a really productive conversation, I think gets in the way of us really getting anywhere.
Well, those pesky historical facts, they really mess with the narratives and the headline reading.
I can't spend 18 hours debunking every single random thing that you
when
bring
you don't
up.
know any of them, of course not.
Yeah, that's fine. You can take your little jabs and feel good about them. But for anybody who's interested in the actual substance, by all means, human rights organizations are absolutely the source that you should go to. Please go read everything that Amnesty International had to say about the massacre that Israel committed in Gaza in 2014 and the ongoing devastating, indiscriminate massacre where they are absolutely obliterating Gaza. Those are the things that your audience should definitely read.
Okay.
On this note, I do have kids that wake up from their nap around this time. So genuinely, even though I did not particularly enjoy this conversation and I did not think that you were engaging in it in good faith, I nonetheless do appreciate you making the time for me to come on. So at least to that much, I am grateful.
Yeah, thanks for chatting. Bye.
Take care.
Okay. Somewhere out there will be a pro-Palestinian that knows anything. The oppressor/oppressed narrative is such a huge part of lefty arguments. It seems to justify almost anything in their eyes. It feels like you need to directly confront that narrative. Yeah, it's just annoying, I guess. I don't know.